Well, Marcus, for the purpose of the video, I'd like to welcome you again. And we've been chatting for a while about the various practices that you come in contact with. And
Mm.
the first thing that I would like to mention is that all of the practices are designed to bring about a product, and that product is liberation or freedom from suffering. But let's use an analogy of a cake. That your whole idea is to bake a cake. So you've got to get all the ingredients together to bake the cake. That's basically what the word samadhi means, is to gather together the factors that,
Yeah.
okay. Now, it's quite natural to start thinking about, I need this, and then I need that, and then I need this. But what I need first is this one. So let's go get it. Now, if we are trying to teach people that, then naturally it's going to be that many of the students are going to think of, because I say go get this, that this is important. It's not just an ingredient, it's the big whoop-de-doo, because that's what we're doing. And that this is what happens with retreats, because retreats are almost always taught in an organized way. Almost all retreats have beginners as your primary audience. And so almost all retreats then is the same retreat, one after another, after another. And even
Mm.
when they're doing an advanced retreat, they're only now doing second grade.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. But that in fact, life comes at you from all angles in all kinds of ways. And that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa then focuses more on a natural method, a natural plan, where we kind of know about all of the different tools and things that we need, even though we're not really skilled in any of them yet. So rather than getting one skill, we're going to start developing them all kind of together. This is much more of a natural approach than the traditional way of teaching one thing at a time. An example of that is the Goenka retreat. They they focus on first the breathing and then the body, and then the retreat is over. And they haven't even touched all of the Satipatthana yet, because the Satipatthana has the body, the feelings, the mind, and the mind's objects. And that it's impossible for a student to join a meditation retreat or even sit on the floor in his living room and have only the body there while the mind and the feelings and all are in the bed taking a nap. Doesn't happen that way.
Yeah.
You got to bring it all
Mm.
together at the same time, which means you've got to deal with it all at not necessarily at the exact same instant, but one after the other after the other. There's the body to deal with, there's the feelings to deal with, and that it also seems that it's the feelings that are the most difficult to deal with. And therefore, that's generally left to the last of the process.
Mm.
And so, getting this cake together, what we're going to beginning to look at is that the Satipatthana is an entire framework for an individual human, and that framework then is going to be broken down into other areas. For instance, the five aggregates is very similar to the four foundations of mindfulness. Item by item, they're the same. Okay, so and then the five aggregates are part and parcel of the paticca samuppada. So the breaking down with Samuppada actually is just a deeper or more using a microscope level of looking at the four foundations of mindfulness.
Is Samapada meaning the links of dependent origination?
Right.
Yeah.
Because all of the components of the body and the mind and the feelings and the mind's objects are all built right into the paticca samuppada. And so you can collect all those together and back and call it the four foundations of mindfulness. Another way of looking at it is from the position of the second noble truth of what is the cause of suffering. And then that what is the cause of suffering breaks down then into the satipatthana, which breaks down into the five aggregates, which breaks further down into paticca samuppada. So when we fully understand how our own mind works, then we can make some slight adjustments to it, give it a tune-up, so that it doesn't backfire and belch smoke and all of that kind of stuff. But it's a tooling dude now. Okay, so this is the way that we begin to look at it. So the next point is that the four foundations of mindfulness, the satipatthana, is fulfilled by the practice of Anapanasati. That the Anapanasati Sutta is actually laid out in the sense that we practice the Anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness. And now we're practicing Anapanasati and the four foundations of mindfulness for the fulfillment of the jhana, the seven factors of enlightenment. Now, in the Satipatthana Sutta at that point, it's actually talking about what to be aware of, and they mention the Four Noble Truths, especially the fourth noble truth, which is the path. But in the Anapanasati Sutra, it talks about it in the sense of the Sambhojana. But when you look at the Four Noble Truths and compare them with the Sambhojana, what you see is that the path, the Eightfold Noble Path, is that which needs to be done.
Yeah.
And seven factors of enlightenment is that which you have done to get your place up to the point that you've got the factors of enlightenment.
It's about the conditioning, right? What you can do. Yeah.
So in fact, the Eightfold Noble Path has factors that have to be practiced until their fulfillment, and when they're fulfilled, now they're enlightenment factors. In the beginning, they were skills to be developed, and now they are skills that have been developed. And once we've got those skills developed, or the reason or the rationale for developing these skills is for the twin term of knowledge and deliverance. Knowledge is real knowledge. You know, it's not a guess, it's not a belief, it's knowledge. That knowledge cannot be shared because it's knowledge of figuring yourself out for yourself, and you know who you are. So that knowledge then gives us deliverance, and what Bodhi means by using the word deliverance, I think is in the Pali, is the word moksha, or deliverance means liberation or freedom. So knowledge gives us freedom. Knowledge is power. And here the power is freedom from dukkha, freedom from dissatisfaction. Well, that makes it really convenient when people are using words, modern words like enlightenment. Why? Because look at the word light, which is the primary word in the word enlightenment. You have two kinds of light. You have the kind of light like daylight. You turn the lights on. The dawning of the sun, or it dawned on me, the light came on, etc., like that. That's what we refer to then as knowledge. Now that the daylight has come, I can really see what's going on. I can see the mess that the night has made. And then with that, the second kind of enlightenment, the light here is not heavy. Why? Because we've been delivered. We have dropped the burden. What burden did we drop? The burden that we can see. Once we see things as a burden, we can see it. Once we see dukkha, now we naturally want to avoid it. So this is what I've actually given you now an entire overview of the Anapanasati Sutta. The Anapanasati is the method and practice that the Buddha says bears great fruit, and it is practiced for the fulfillment of the satipatthana, and the satipatthana then with Anapanasati is for the fulfillment of the 7 factors of enlightenment, skills, and that we do that for knowledge and deliverance. So this is the framework that the Anapanasati is set up, which means that there's going to be 4 different parts of the Anapanasati practice: the part for the body, the part for the feelings, the part for the chitta nupassana, and Dhamma nupassana. Kaya nupassana, Vedana nupassana, chitta nupassana or sita, and Dhamma nupassana. And these are the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And in fact, this nupassana means the knowledge. And you can see the word vipassana kind of hiding in there someplace.
Jhana, yeah.
All right. So we begin with the body, but we only begin with the body in order to develop skills, so that then we can use those skills for deeper research. And so with Anapanasati, we're actually now, if we're looking for these skills that are the 7 factors of enlightenment, that means that they also, with the 4 Noble Truths and specifically the Eightfold Noble Path, has to be incorporated right into our practice of Anapanasati. And in fact, these are the skills that are to be developed. The first one, primary and most important one, it's not the first one, by the way. The first one, and therefore the primary and most important one, would be right view, right noble view. An example of that is you wouldn't call me if you didn't have the right view to call me. Okay, so we start right at the very beginning. That's what we mean why it's so primary. But as that skill is put into motion and the other skills are developed, then this skill of right view also develops along with them. Right view increases as we increase our skill in the second one, which is the primary one that we're going to work on as a skill development item, is sati. That's why we have satipatthana. That's why we call it Anapanasati. Sati, by the way, is one of the items on the Eightfold Noble Path, and it's the first item of enlightenment, unremitting sati. Okay, so this is how important that one is. Remember sati. You know why?
I'll try,
Because what sati means is to remember. It's translated as the word mindfulness, but that's not necessarily a good translation of the word. That in fact, mindfulness loses a lot of the power that the word sati has, in the sense that another way of looking at sati itself is that it's actually step 9 of Anapanasati, in the sense of experiencing the mind, investigating the mind. And the very first student, his very first thing to do is to keep his mind on the breath, and then the mind wanders away from the breath. Now we need sati to remember that the mind has wandered away from the breath, so that we can then come back to the breath. Well, many times students don't come back to the breath, even if they remember to come back to the breath. Why? Because they don't have the right effort. We have to add the right effort in, and once we have right effort and right sati, running and circling around right view, then the skills begin to develop to the point that they will become noble. In the beginning, they're just ordinary skills. We need sati on a regular basis throughout our day. Like you need to remember where you put your keys. You need to remember all kinds of things. The common way of living, we have to remember all kinds of things. You have to remember your way to town. You have to remember so much.
Yeah.
So now we're going to start to develop remembering as a skill, so that people then will not be so forgetful about where they put their keys. When they set the keys down, they note that they're putting their keys down, and so they know where the keys are. If they go back to that place and the keys are not there, it's not because they're scatterbrained, it's because someone else moved them. Okay, so this sati is the most important skill to be developed, and that we do it then the following way. If the intention with Anapanasati, starting with the body, if the intention is to watch the breath, then sati means to remember, to watch the breath, to remember it over and over and over and over again, because we're developing it for the body, because we're really going to use that skill of remembering. We're going to do it not just with the body, but we're going to remember what kind of thoughts we're having. We're going to remember and watch what kind of feelings we've got. And we're going to start remembering what kind of condition the mind is in, etc., like that. This is then the fulfillment of the Satipatthana completely. But we have to start someplace. And so Goenka starts with Anapana and then the body scan. The Mahasi system starts with rising, falling, touching, sitting. But then when they go into the noting, now we're beginning to note not just the body itself, but other things also. So once we get these three things going, the right view, right sati, and right effort, we then develop right attitude. And right attitude is a skill to be developed. An example, by the way, of wrong attitude is, oh, I can't do it. Oh, I don't feel like it. Oh, my mommy was really bad to me. Maybe I need a drink. Okay. These are all wrong attitudes about basically, am I capable or not? Wrong attitudes will have doubt built into them.
What's right attitude in Pali?
Sama area ditti.
Okay.
Sama is right, area is noble, and ditti is right view.
Okay.
There's actually a Samadhi Sutta, number 9 in the Majjhima Nikaya, and that is, in fact, Sariputta's reverse order version of the Paticca Samuppada.
Okay.
To where in the place where it actually discusses right view, it talks about it much more in the sense of investigation. That one's right view is to not come to a conclusion, but to continue to investigate. An example of that is Paticca Samuppada happens in the mind very quickly. It goes sometimes within a second or two. It happens, it starts here and it moves to there. Then it starts here and it moves to there, and it starts here and it moves to there, and it starts here and it moves to there over and over and over again. The question is, can you be mindful of, or can you remember to watch what's going on? And so the Buddha talks about the mind being very fast. There's a sutta in the I think it's in the Anguttara Nikaya, and it's in the ones, it's in the number, because he's talking about one thing, and he says the mind, O monks, is fast. The mind is so fast I don't even have an analogy for it. So part of our skill development is going to be getting the sati up to speed. And that what happens over the course of practice when people are practicing correctly is that even though cause, effect, we learn Paticca Samuppada from the cause to the effect, which becomes the cause, which is the next effect, which becomes the cause, doing the next effect, cascading one after the other. Because of the mind now becoming speedier and able to see things, we actually practice the Paticca Samuppada in reverse order. So we understand it in forward order. This causes that, this causes that, this causes that. But then we begin to practice. Why? Because we're slow. We're already way down there in the deep end of it before we realize it. But then as our skill improves, we begin to see things happen sooner and sooner. And so this is basically part of the skill development, is so that we can see what's happening in the mind more clearly, because we're catching the events sooner. This is why sati is such an important skill. to remember to be here now is basically the easy way of saying it. So now let's look at the Four Noble Truths, or let us say this part of the Eightfold Noble Path that we've started to talk about. And we can finish the path off very quickly by saying, if you're sitting down on the floor with your eyes closed, your hands folded, your legs folded, practicing meditation, in that moment, your sila is perfect. You've got absolutely right behavior. Why? Because you're not doing anything. How right can it be? You're not saying anything. How right can your speech be? Okay, so in that regard, then we can say that right behavior and right speech are almost like an aftermath. And yet in traditional Buddhism, they're the first thing that's taught. And they're taught under the rubric of children are too stupid. They don't have the wisdom to see what's right and wrong, so we got to tell them. And so we give them a bunch of rules to follow. Part of becoming noble is to come out of those rules and start living our lives according to wisdom. But we have to tell the kids, oh, you got to follow these rules. If you don't follow these rules, something bad's going to happen. And the kids are going to figure out right away, well, if I'm pretty smart, there ain't no bad things going to happen. I can go around and do everything I want to do. And so we have to add this magical ingredient. Oh, no, it doesn't matter. Eventually, you'll get caught. Even if you're dead, the karma machine is going to dig you up out of the ground just to beat your ass. And so we teach that to the kids. Maybe not in that language, but you get the point. I like to make a joke out of it. But through wisdom, we can see when the mind is noble. If your mind is noble, your heart is pure, that you don't want anything, that you're completely comfortable and satisfied, then your likelihood of getting in your car and going down to the store and shoplifting is very low. Because the mind is pure, we don't need anything, and therefore we're unlikely then to go off in bad behavior. So now let's look at that last point of the Eightfold Noble Path, and that is Samadhi, which is translated as right noble concentration. And the answer to that is, wait a minute, let's get our definition straight first before we start putting that in there. What the Buddha actually is referring to here is samadhi is not a matter of concentration in the sense of, we think of concentration as distilling or getting down to the important parts. An example would be frozen concentrated orange juice or concentrated milk. Okay, or they tell the kids to focus or concentrate on your studies, which means throw out everything else and only look at what we're talking about here. Okay, this is what we mean by concentration. This is not what we're looking for, though, in the Eightfold Noble Path. What we're looking for is what the Buddha would refer to as unification of mind. When you become whole, when all of the factors that are needed to come together, then you're whole. And that the things that are going to scatter you would then be things like bad feelings, telling lies, being in doubt, any of those kind of things. And so as those are dealt with, the mind becomes more unified. You become kind of passionless instead of being passionate in this way about that, passionate about this thing over here, and we wind up being a crowd inside. But once we have the mind unified, we're no longer a crowd. We're just one thing. And when we begin to get that state, we also recognize, wait a minute, this oneness is not a oneness here. It's the oneness of the Dhamma. It's the Dhammakai. It's the big it. It's the thing that the Christians want to call God, but their ideas of God are so small that they're missing out on the big oneness of it all. But the Buddhists have got that. I mean, the Dalai Lama is very famous for going to New York and asking the hot dog vendor to make me one with everything.
Yeah.
And so Making me one with everything is basically this quality of having the mind unified. That we become unified, and we do it through development of these skills. So the first part of the Eightfold Noble Path is skill development, and then the outcome of that is right noble samadhi, unification of mind, and then the aftermath of that is right behavior, right action, right speech, and right livelihood. But almost always, students like you, for instance, we've heard those rules, and so we start to practice the rules thinking that the rules are going to help me become enlightened. No, enlightenment is going to help you keep the rules. That's a better way of looking at it. And so we can also use these rules and the rule breaking and the way that we feel about it as objects for practice to develop these skills. And so now that we're talking about these four skills, let's go see how they fit in with Anapanasati by the numbers. Now, I normally will use the steps because that's how I was taught and it got started. But when we're talking about steps, we're not talking about you take a baby step or a first step and then you take a second step, like a third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, like that. No, these are not like this. This is much more like a tango. Our dance with life does not move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. Sometimes we jump from 16 to 1 and back to 7 and back to number 9, etc., like that. That's how it really is.
And do these steps just arise just from mindfulness of the breath? Is the main aim?
Well, if we look at it, we can start to see that sati itself, which is the key that kicks things off correctly, is closely associated with step 9 of Anapanasati, which is also the first one on the list of Chitta Nupassana. Okay, and that is to experience the mind. The first thing that the student does will ask the question, is the mind watching the breath or not? Once skill is developed, now the questions would be, is the mind hindered or not? Are the hindrances there, or am I free from the hindrances? A little bit later, and more than that, will be when we begin to experience the mind in the sense of not just encumbered or free, but it is also from the perspective of, is the mind bright? Is it sharp? Is it dull? Is it lazy? Is it exalted? Is it high quality or low quality? These are the things that we begin to do with one's right view, is begin to investigate and understand the state of mind that we're in right now. And so this is sati. Sati is that step 9 of Anapanasati on the wake-up call. Let's look at the mind. Let's see what's going on. Let's stop just thinking about Aunt Susie and the fight we had with her yesterday. Let's look at this in a moment. Let's see what's happening now. And so then the second one would be right effort. And right effort is really important also. Why? Because most students practice effort wrongly. They either put in too much or not enough. Asians generally don't put enough effort in, and Westerners generally put in too much. The reason why they put in too much effort is because they want too much. That they come to meditation the way that they would go to the store. They go to get something. And when they get to that store and the item is not there, then what they came to get, and so they get frustrated, and so they go to another store and another store. I want it. Okay. And most importantly for most students is that they want enlightenment. Wanting something you don't have is the classic definition of dukkha. So what we need then to practice is to be in a state of satisfaction. Step 10 of Anapanasati, one's right effort, is to gladden the mind. The gladdening of the mind also has the quality of changing the contents of the mind. Because if the mind had wandered away, almost assuredly for the beginning student, it has wandered away into hindrances. It's wandered into the past, wandered into the future, wandered into wants and desires, wandered into doubt, wandered into just a restless state, worries, all kinds of things like that have all one quality, and that is the quality that it's not here now. Are you familiar with the name that the Buddha called himself? He didn't call himself Buddha.
Tathagata.
What does that mean?
Thus gone.
Huh?
Thus gone.
The scum. No.
No, sorry.
Are,
This thus gone, or thus come, thus gone, or is it extinguished?
okay. Would you believe that that's a really terrible translation?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at the word thus for a moment.
Yeah. Back to the biblical language.
All
Yeah,
right.
I
Back to the
see.
biblical
Okay.
language. Okay. What thus actually means is this. This here right now. And the Pali word for that is tatata. Tatata basically means be here now. And the word tathagata has that go in it, the one who has come to this present moment. Well, where did he come from? He came out of his own past, or he came out of his own future, or he came out of his own misery. Where did he come to? Here now. There's been other teachers that have been well known. For instance, Ram Dass just died recently, and they had a big whoop to do for him. What was his first book? Was Be Here Now. Rest for the Mill was good, but Be Here Now, that was it. That tells the story right there. Also, Eckhart Tolle has the term this present moment. This is basically the immediate goal that the meditator should have, is to come out of our own hindrances of the past, present, or past and future, and come to what's happening right now. And in the process of doing that, we gladden the mind. And so a way of gladdening the mind then also has the quality of changing the mind's contents. That whatever they were, now we're having a new thought. And so here's an example of that. If the mind has wandered away from the breath, then the wake up or the sati happens. The mind has wandered away. The gladdening of the mind then is, aha, I see you. Aha, it is seen that the mind has wandered away. Well, now that's a brand new thought. And that also is a thought about this present moment. Aha, I caught the mind had wandered away. And so this is one's right beginning, right gladdening the mind, which is step 10 of Anapanasati, part of the Sitana Vipassana. And so we gladden the mind. This gladdening of the mind sets it up for the feelings to fall in line. Because as you probably know, that we're an integrated unit. That even though we're breaking it apart in looking at it in these four areas of body, feeling, mind, and mind's objects, we also know that the body affects the feelings. If you get sick, you will feel sick. If the body gets agitated, you'll feel agitated. So the body conditions the feelings. The feelings condition the mind. If you're agitated, the body's agitated, then the feelings are agitated. The mind becomes agitated, and therefore our thoughts become agitated thoughts. But the other thing can happen too. If we can have calming thoughts, then that will calm the mind. It will calm the feelings and calm the body. So all of this stuff works together. And the place that we're going to start with this is, what are the content of the mind? Because we just experienced that the content of the mind was not on the breath. That's the first thing. That's sati. That's the wake up. And so now we gladden the mind in the sense of, I can see you. and we begin to have happy thoughts. We could go so far, even one student was talking about affirmations, except that affirmations are kind of different because it's aspiring to things that we don't have. What we're talking about here is, no, let's go for the really good stuff we've got right now. This is not aspirational. This is not wanting something we don't have. This is something that we just are in the process of creating. And that creation then is the gladdening of the mind. The mind becomes lighter. It's normally heavy when it's all thinking about stuff. So this gladdening of the mind then is step 10 of Anapanasati. And so we can begin to see, wait a minute, there's kind of a dance here going on. Step 9, step 10, then we take a really deep breath. Now, this is one of the points that's quite often missed, is that the Buddha was really big on deep breathing. That's step 1 of Anapanasati. And yet, in some traditions, most of them associated with Sri Lanka and the Visuddhimagga, because the Visuddhimagga says don't control the breath. Well, the Visuddhimagga, we already know, is not our practice. That people who practice the Visuddhimagga don't get the best benefit. That the Buddha recommends a deep breath. How can you have a deep breath if you're not going to take a deep breath? And if you take a deep breath, how can you take one without controlling your breath? Makes no sense to say don't control the breath. Oh no, now there's other reasons to control the breath. And that is that the whole point we're breathing anyway is two things. One is both the intake and the exhaust. The intake is of air in the form of oxygen, and the exhaust that's given off is our own human smoke. May not be able to see the smoke, but there is a complex set of chemicals that come out with the exhale. So, in fact, if we're breathing correctly, we're actually doing a better job of cleaning the mess out of the lungs, even to the point that if the lungs are filled with fluids like pneumonia, that deep breathing will then help get that the moisture out of the lungs. And yet the doctors would rather give a patient a respirator than to tell him to breathe. Why? Because he'll forget to breathe. Why does he forget to breathe? No sati. Getting ill with the coronavirus is not the time to learn to practice Anapanasati. But if you do get the coronavirus and do get pneumonia, Anapanasati, that's the tool you use. So we're going to be using Anapanasati not only to cure ourselves of the coronavirus, whether we've got it or not, but we're going to cure ourselves of all of the ills, all of the unsatisfactory things. And we do it with this deep breathing to oxygenate the body and to clean it out, to get the carbon dioxide. But other things are going to be cleaned out, like amino acids that are associated with adrenaline. And so the very things that keep the body and the feelings upset then can be helped be managed, not by just the mind, but also our breathing. And so let's go back to that analogy of a cake that we started when we were starting to talk about meditation. Let us say that a cake has at least 5 ingredients, maybe some liquid and some oil. This can be done with milk or butter or whatnot like that. Then you'll have egg, and then you have flour and sugar. But if you left off 2 of these ingredients, would it be a cake? If you didn't have all the ingredients, if you only had a few of the ingredients and you put them together,
it's many different kinds of cake.
Right, well, it wouldn't be cake if it was only milk, lard, and eggs. Then, in fact, you're pretty close to French toast, but you still need that bread. And French toast is often always put with some sweetness on it. Okay, so French toast now is is the cake that we're eating, but now it's got all the ingredients of the cake. They were just done differently. So let's go back to the point then and say that breathing deeply on a regular basis, every time we remember it, then is the flour. That's the major ingredient. But then the sweetness that you put into a cake is this gladdening of the mind. And these are the two ingredients that are not given often to the beginning student. And yet they're so important to add so that we have all of the ingredients that we need. Now, the next thing that we're going to be looking for is that if the mind is gladdened and we're taking good breaths, we're beginning to feel good. Now we've got right effort going, and the right effort is to gladden the mind and to take a deep breath. This, in fact, is a lot of work for some people. To come out of our misery into a state of happiness, come out of our state of collapse and not breathing into full-on breathing, that's going to take some effort. This is one's right effort. Wanting something that we don't have is wrong effort. And that not working enough is also not noble right effort. An example of that is what is often referred to, and you may have heard this term, choiceless awareness. We are not practicing choiceless awareness. Here's an example. Let's say that you're standing on the road. The road may be, in fact, a mental road, because the one that you're standing on now is a mental road, because I just talked about standing in the road. So here you are, mentally standing in the road, and you got a big truck bearing right down on you, a huge lorry. Here it comes. And you see it. And then you stand there and you let it run over you. That's choiceless awareness. I was aware of that truck, and I choicelessly stood here and let it run me over. Well, that's what happens with choiceless awareness, is we get sometimes run over by our own bad feelings because we're not doing what we need to do, okay? So one's right effort then would be to stand out of the way of the lorry. It only takes a step. Just step right out of the way. Just a little bit of effort. In this sense, gladden the mind and let it pass. Note that truck well and let it pass on by. But Westerners, they take the cartoon approach, especially Brutus and Popeye. Do you ever remember the Popeye? Popeye car. I'm Papa the Sailor Man.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when Popeye sees the truck coming, he's going to stand right in front of it with his fist out, saying, or like Superman saying, stop. We're not going to get stopped. We're going to get run over. Okay. So that's too much effort. It's standing and trying to stop it. And choiceless awareness is not enough effort because we're just going to stand there and let it run over us. But one's right effort is to stand out of the way. And in this regard, we're changing the mind. We're going to gladden the mind. We're going to take the right effort. And that this then puts us into a nice state. But then we'll forget again. Never mind. Start again. Start again. Goenka says, start again, which means sati. We need some sati. Once we have the sati, oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm not watching my breath. Well, let me take a really deep breath and gladden the mind, and I'm coming back, and I'm going to come back to a state of homeostasis or a state of satisfaction. All right. So now we're going to add the fourth ingredient, and that is right attitude. Because in this regard, right attitude is more of a feeling than we normally think of as attitude. But if you think about it, attitude is really the way we feel about things. Our worldview is based upon the way we feel. And that most of the time we feel like a victim. That in fact it's very easy for the beginning student when he sees the mind wandering away. He says, oh no, monkey mind, oh, here it comes again. Okay, so now I'm a victim of my own mind. We victimize ourselves on a regular basis. But now we're going to change that and say, no, I'm going to take the right effort. And I'm going to change the content of the mind. And by being able to change the content of the mind, I am no longer a victim of the mind. I'm the boss here. This is an important part about developing that right attitude. The right attitude is, I can do it. And the wrong attitude is, this is hard. This is tough. This is hard work. But the right attitude is, hey, this is a piece of cake. I just made my cake, got all the ingredients together. So I'm making my cake. So that's the way to begin to look. That's one's right attitude. And this is really important. And it's also seen right there in the Anapanasati Sutta. So now we're beginning to look at, as a review, we've done step 1, and perhaps we could even say step 1, 2, and 3 are beginning to experience the body, because over and over again we keep coming back to the body, letting it breathe well, and then noticing what the body is doing. We begin to experience the body. So now we've got a lot of stuff going, because we already have worked with the content of the mind in the sense of, did the mind wander away from the breath, or is it on the breath? Or is the mind hindered? What am I thinking about? Now we go to sati and say, okay, now we're going to be experiencing the mind. We're going to gladden the mind, and we're still working with the body. So that leaves now feelings, which is the attitude. And in the feelings, the first item on the list, or the first 2 items, is piti and suka. We want to develop these things. These are skills to be developed. Step 5 of Anapanasati is piti, and step 6 is suka. Now, I really don't know whose fault it is or who to blame for the bad translation of piti into the word rapture, but that's the wrong
Strange one.
Oh, that's really a strange one. Where did they get rapture? Okay. Perhaps raptured means to be wrapped in it or absorbed by it. But this is not an absorption. This is a championship. Absorption is also almost like becoming absorbed or a victim. But real piti that the Buddha is talking about is the feeling of can do, that I can do this. It's the winner. You're the champion. You can do this. That's the whole quality of that. It's the exalted, and you see on sports on TV when the runner maybe in the Olympics, when he is the champion and he's won the race, what does he do? He raises his hands in the air, yay, me! Okay, got that gold. Okay, well, there are tens of thousands of people who have gotten gold medals from one competition or another, but a noble mind is even more rare than the gold medalist. And so if you can get your mind into the state of can do, that you're the champion, that you are in regard of meditation, you're a gold medalist. You're the winner here. That's what piti is. And that the gladdening of the mind is the spark that sets that afire, so that you feel really good. It's a can-do attitude. And that then is followed by suka, which is really the big deal, and that is the satisfaction. You cannot feel satisfied unless you feel successful. How can you feel like a failure and still be satisfied? You get what I mean? All right. But when you feel like you're the champion, that you can do this, this is a job and it's well done. This is a job well done. What was the job to do? Clean the mind out, get rid of the hindrances, come back to the present moment. That's all we're asking you to do. We're just asking you to do it over and over and over again every time you remember. And so we begin to develop this feeling, this experience of can do. I can do this. And I start to feel really good. And then we become satisfied. Right? Well, what is the satisfaction then if it's not the exact opposite of being dissatisfied? We have just gotten ourselves now out of a state of dukkha. We didn't have to go into any magical mystical states. We're not on the ninth heaven or the seventh hell or the 14th jhana or any of that kind of stuff. We're just in a state of being free from suffering. We're in a state of satisfaction. And that needs to be practiced over and over and over again. But something really interesting has just happened now. And that is these things that we're talking about are actually gathering jhana factors together. Because not only are these things items on the list of skills to be developed in the Anapanasati Sutta, they are factors that need to be collected together for first jhana. So let's review what first jhana is. First jhana is the rapture and pleasure, or the suka and piti, that is born from seclusion. Seclusion from what? Seclusion from the hindrances of the mind. So first we get ourselves physically secluded, and then we get ourselves mentally secluded from the world and everything about it, and we're only paying attention to what's happening in this present moment. So now we're beginning to build the jhana factors together. Also, this taking the deep breath and getting the mind strong and activated and full of energy is what Bhikkhu Buddhadasa refers to as making the mind fit for work. So in this practice of Anapanasati, even a beginning student, for a brief moment, can put themselves in the state of first jhana, which is the state that the Buddha highly recommends. You know, that he did practice jhana states and all of that before he became enlightened and was dissatisfied with it so much that he went off and practiced austerities for a while. And when he got really good at that, he figured out that ain't going to do it either. Okay, so he needed to find a new way. And then while he was crawling out of the creek that he couldn't get out of, with the thought of, if I can't even get out of a creek because I'm so weak with these austerities, how can I become enlightened? And then he reflected upon when he was young, he sat under the rose apple tree while his father was doing a plowing ceremony. And that's when he remembered the first jhana like that. And he says, why am I afraid of this sukha, this pleasure that comes from first jhana? Maybe, in fact, this is the path to enlightenment. And then he says, yes, this is the path to enlightenment. And yet the Western world, they can't get along with just first step. They want the third jhana, the fourth jhana. They even want jhana so bad they even give new names to them and say, oh no, there's not 4, there's 8. More work to do. So this is actually a trap, and it's greed that causes this trap. Where Buddha was doing it out of pure ignorance, everybody was doing it. This is what is done. Let me go try that. But in the process of developing the skills that he did get while he was doing the austerities and all of that, made him pretty tough-minded. But what he came to understand is that, oh no, what we really need is getting the mind into this state of first jhana, because only then is the mind fit for work to see what's really going on. And what are we going to then see what's going on? The way the mind works. We're going to see suffering. We're going to see the cause of suffering. We're going to actually experience what it's like to be free from suffering. Very few teachers spend much time with the third jhana, or not the third jhana, the third noble truth. What is it like to be free from suffering? Sukha, that's what it's like. To be in a state of pleasure, to be in a state of contentment, to be in a state of security. No, nothing to fear. I'm the champion here. I'm the one who's successful. So all of those feelings of fear, anguish, guilt, anxiety, grief, all of those for the moment are at bay, because we're now in a state of sukha. And so this is the way to practice when you've got all of the factors of Anapanasati together. We're collecting the factors together in my description of it so that you then can begin to gather these factors together for your own experience and your practice. And so, never mind. So what we need to do then is twofold. One is to get the mind into a state of satisfaction, get it into this first jhana. And then the second thing that needs to be done is to stay there. Okay? So how to stay there, we'll talk about next time. Right now, the practice is to get into it and keep getting into it. In fact, for a little while, it's quite okay that you can't stay in there because you also want to develop sati. So as soon as you lose it and you recognize that you're losing it, then you come back and proceed again. You gladden the mind, you take a deep breath, you feel the security of being a winner, and you come back to a state of satisfaction, and you practice this over and over and over again as a skill. Just by practicing it over and over again, it begins to linger, but there's some definite things that we're going to do that's going to keep it going. Why? We're going to begin to investigate the things that are pulling you out. But the first thing to do is to get into this first jhana, to get into a state of satisfaction, to get into a state where the mind is really fit for work. Why? Because it's oxygenated, it's got the carbon dioxide and all of that stuff cleaned out, that we're not dirty in the mind, and that we're also not ruled by either our thoughts or our feelings. We're beginning, in fact, to manage our own feelings. One of the students said something about this that I thought was so amusing that I want to make sure all the students hear about it. And that, he said, was everyone is an emperor of their own pile of dirt. You too are an emperor of your own pile of dirt. But most emperors, most people, they stay half or deeply buried under their dirt. They're not on top of it. They're a victim of their own pile of dirt. So in this case, you're practicing becoming the emperor of your own pile of dirt. Now, what does an emperor do with a pile of dirt? Is he going to be buried in it, or is he going to be sitting on top of it?
On top.
He's going to be sitting on top of his own world, right? Sitting on top of the world is, the Pali word for that is going to be lokatara, which means to be above the world. Bhikkhu translates that as supramundane. Others translate it as transcendent. But I like the word being on top of the world better. They make songs about being on top of the world. So here's how we do that. We continuously practice to be on top of our own world, knowing that we're going to get buried in it really quickly. But we're going to eventually practice on how to stay on top of the world. But right now, we're going to be practicing to get on top of the world over and over and over again. Every time we catch ourselves under that pile of dirt, we gladden the mind, we take a deep breath, we come back to a state of winnership, the winner. I can do this. And we also come to the point of being satisfied with this present moment, to be here now, to be the Tathagata, to be a Buddha right now. Even the gold medalists can't claim that they're Buddha right now.
Even the who, sorry?
Even the gold medalists.
Yeah.
The ones who have that championship feeling, they still don't have it completely. But here we know that the goal was not running very fast, and we mean by running very fast is faster than other people. What we mean here, the goal is to have the mind being pure, free from hindrance. Well, it is right now. Right now, you're Buddha. Right now, you're Tathagata. Enlightenment is not something you want. Enlightenment is something that you're experiencing right now. And this is the way that we begin to practice. We begin to change our attitude about things that we don't want or don't have and want into what do we have right now is really, really wonderful. It's really satisfying. This is really good stuff. And we change our attitude about it. That's the main thing. The attitude from being a victim into, and I'll introduce you a new concept, into becoming a lion. Why do I use that? Because the Buddha referred to himself as a lion. What is a lion if nothing but a winner? He's the big predator. He's the big cheese. And you are, in fact, the big cheese. You're the emperor of your own mind, of your own pile of dirt. And so we begin to practice this over and over again to give ourselves that state of huge satisfaction. And so satisfaction becomes a skill to be developed. This word suka. Stay in that state of suka. Get that sweetness. Allow that cake to be fully formed with all of its ingredients. And so in this case, the cake that we're baking is actually first jhana, and we now have the ingredients. So let's review those. We have rapture or sukha, piti and sukha, born of seclusion. The seclusion that we're born of is the seclusion of the hindrances. Freeing the mind from hindrances is real freedom. And the more you practice that, the better it tastes, the better it feels to be completely free from the hindrances. This is part of the issue of the investigation, is really investigate how much better you feel when the mind is here now and how bad it feels when it's stuck in the past or stuck in desire or stuck in wanting things that we don't have. That's suffering, or that's dukkha. It may not be suffering, but it sure is dissatisfying. But getting ourselves into a state of satisfaction, that's the way to practice. So that's what my advice for you to get started, to keep bringing yourself back to a state of satisfaction over and over and over again. And it takes all of these factors together. Deep breathing, gladdening the mind, and most importantly, sati, to remember, to remember, to remember, to remember. And this is part of the reason why people go off in seclusion. Well, you're already naturally in seclusion. I would assume your school is closed. Yesterday, Thailand just closed down all their schools.
That's right.
So now you're in seclusion. What are you going to do with it?
Be secluded.
Be secluded. Right. That's it. Exactly. So now that you're physically secluded, you're going to seclude yourself mentally from that world. And so you can think of it like this, that for the next few days while you're at home, don't think about anything that's not right there in front of you in your house. Don't think about what's happening in Bangkok. Don't think about what's happening in England. Don't think about what's happening in Timbuktu or down the road. Just what's happening right here, right now. And so that's a good way for the folks who are in seclusion from, most people are quarantined or even solitary confinement is supposed to be a hell. That's actually the worst punishment that the prison can give to a prisoner if they can't beat the crap out of him, is they'll put him in seclusion. But us Buddha boys, the Dhammaratos, they say, yeah, right, put me in solitary confinement so I don't have to deal with all of these prisoners in this prison. Except that in this case, where's that prison? Because Buddhadasa says the prison is the prison of the mind. So let's get secluded from that. Get these hindrances out of the mind so that we can take a breather. And I mean that literally. To breathe and to be in a state of enjoyment. And it'll be hard for a while, but you'll get used to it. It will become a habit. And we'll be working on things that help develop that throughout the day. But for right now, the most important time is for you, because you've already got a sitting practice going, is to start practicing this. We'll also take the time to talk about what I've just said in relationship to Mahasi, or in relationship to Goenka, because they're teaching the same thing. They're just not teaching all of it because they're teaching beginners. And so we need to have that new stuff added, that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says, oh no, you can't practice Anapanasati a little piece at a time. You got to learn it a little piece at a time, but we're going to practice it all together. Because we cannot leave the mind in the bed while we're practicing Anapanasati or Kaya Nupassana, the body. No, we got to have the whole thing there. So we're going to start working with it as a combination. Another way that I like to talk about it is learning to play the piano. Would you go to a piano teacher if for the first year, he only gave you the note C?
No.
And then the next year you can get a D, and so now you can do a C and a D together. 3 years later, you can get a C, D, E. No, you don't do that. No, you got the whole keyboard. You may divide it down to white keys and black keys and give the kids a chance to learn to play the white keys. But then we can do it on the black keys too, or change keys, and then we begin to get it all together. That's the way that we want to practice, is that we don't want to do it. Another example I use is you go to a school that teaches how to drive cars, or maybe even how to fly an airplane. But let's use the word for the car. So the first lesson you have is the steering wheel. The second lesson you have is the throttle. The third lesson you have is the gears. And so off you go. You got everything you need now. Next week, we'll teach you about brakes. Bye-bye. No, so let's not practice our meditation that way. To learn to drive a car requires coordination between all of these things. And that's part of what we have to learn to do, is coordinate these things, or get all the factors together so that we can have a really delicious cake. So, do you have any questions about what we've been talking about?
Sure. I understand that Anapanasati and Satipatthana are interconnected. I did read the sutta recently, and the Satipatthana was like not an addendum, like underneath the instructions for the steps of the breath. There's the how it ties in with the breath, with the breathing. But do you think I should focus right now? What I've been doing, or what I did yesterday, was half an hour of, first there's mindful prostrations, which is as taught by Ajahn Tong, it takes about 5 minutes. Then I did 30 minutes of walking with noting, 30 minutes of sitting with noting, and then I have an additional 30 minutes of Anapanasati.
Okay. First off, we'll talk about noting later. But an important point is that let's not make it too strong. That it's got to be really, really lightweight. In fact, that phrase that I say, aha, I see you, that's noting. So begin to note well, but what we're looking at is noting what's going on, noting what we're doing, noting the hindrances, but we're actually going to not just note and let it pass by itself. In some cases, we're going to actually stand out of the way. We're going to change the way. This is an active thing. We got to put in some effort for it. But you mentioned something about doing frustration for 5 minutes. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's kneeling down, just prostrations, yeah.
Not frustrations. Good. Okay.
Okay.
My ears are not always wonderful. Okay. Prostrations are part of the Buddhist religion. They, as you know, people do that all over the place. In India, they even will do those prostrations on a long journey, a pilgrimage of standing up, taking a step, and then kneeling down and bowing and all of that kind of stuff. And then they stand up and take one more step, so that it takes sometimes months to get a few miles. Okay. But those guys who do that are not liberated from suffering. Why? Because if they were liberated from suffering, then they said, why am I doing these prostrations?
Yeah.
Right. So, in fact, the prostrations themselves create and cause suffering, just like the Tadanga or the austerities that the Buddha practiced. And he recommended, don't do that unless you've got a good reason for it. 5 minutes sounds like a long time. Even the monks do 1, 2, 3, and they're up and gone.
Yeah, yeah. As it was taught to me, they explained that because on retreat the it's so dry that it's used as kind of a practice for concentration. It's nothing involved as well. So touching, raising, 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 touching, lowering, 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 touching, and so on and so forth. Bending, 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 lowering, 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 touching, 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 turning, turning, turning. It was used to integrate with the noting, but to cultivate concentration before the walking and the sitting.
But it's not developing concentration, it's developing sati.
I was confused about that too, but I think it's because, from what my reasoning with it is that you're not noting, say, if a dog backing out the window, you're not intentionally noting that while you're doing that. You just concentrated on the bodily movements.
Okay. So, in that regard, then, maybe this will help. If you are, in fact, breathing correctly, then each deep in breath requires some sati, and each out breath that is like a sigh, like where we let everything out, that also requires us to remember to do our out breath that way. Because if we don't remember, then we'll just go back to normal breathing. So sati is developed by breathing. You can develop sati in many, many different ways. And so what they're giving you there is it's a kind of a beginner's technique. There's nothing really wrong with it, but it's also unnecessary. It's not sufficient. It's not necessary and it's not sufficient, but it does have value. And so if you like it, that's the question. If you like doing it, continue to do it. If you don't see any value in it, then what's the point of doing it? What we're really wanting to do is look at, well, what is the value of doing such a practice? The answer is developing sati. Because if you've got a set procedure that's got 10 or 12 steps, moving from one step to the next all has to do with you have to remember to move from one step to the next. So this is part of developing sati. But a much stronger sati is to wake up to the fact that you forgot to do that. That's when sati gets stronger and stronger. Once sati gets going, you can keep it going, like doing the procedure of prostrations or whatever. But the sati that we need to develop is the sati we don't have. Here's a way of looking at that. I talk about it in the sense of advice. Advice is all over the place. You can get advice anywhere. You can get it from a lawyer. Sometimes you can get it from a priest. So good advice is everywhere. Everybody's got good advice. The problem with good advice is we can't remember to apply it just when we need it the most. It's almost like Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it'll go wrong at the worst possible time. Okay, so the time when we need the advice most is when we forget it. That's the kind of sati that we're looking for development, is to being able to remember when we need to remember. the most. Like when Susie screams at you, that's the time that you need sati. And yet that's the time that we're most likely to forget about sati because we're most likely to scream back at her. So this is the kind of sati that we want to develop, not the step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, like that. Even at the point of mindfulness of breathing, that a little sati or the prostrations, that's good. It's beneficial. But the other kind of sati, which is that the mind is gone, is off into hindrances. Can you bring it back? Can you keep bringing it back? If you're saying doing prostrations for 5 minutes helps the sati to get high so that you can bring the mind back very quickly when it wanders away from the breath, then I say, okay, you've got a good advantage there. So you might, in fact, want to play with that and experiment with it. One of the ways that I would say that I'm not giving you a job to do, I'm giving you some toys to play with.
Okay.
And so begin to look at your whole practice as a joyful, toyful experience. Instead of getting rigid, you've got to do it this, that, and the other way, you can actually experiment with those prostrations. You can experiment with it. Today you do it, tomorrow you don't. What's the difference? Because all of this has to do with learning our self-knowledge, to begin to understand who we are and what we are. Because you're not what you thought you were. And many people are really confused. Like most people think they are the body. Look at how many industries are associated with the magical thinking or the delusion when people have I am the body. They look in the mirror and say, oh, I'm ugly today, let me put on makeup. Or I'm sick, I'll go to the doctor. Or I would look beautiful in that dress. And so now you have the fashion industry, the cosmetic industry, the medical industry, the sports industry, the sports clothing industry. All of those industries are catering to people who are under the delusion that they are the body. Wow. Our economy would fall apart if people wised up. And in fact, that's exactly what's happening. Everybody's in seclusion now, and the big foods are worrying about the economy falling apart. Well, who needs an economy? What I need is satisfaction. And very few people who are really interested in the economy, whatever the economy is doing, are not satisfied with it. And so coming back to this point about I am not the body, but that the body is worthy of investigation. I am not the feelings, but the feelings are worthy of investigation. They're worthy of being taken control over, because mostly people live their lives being bossed around by the way they feel. They don't do what they want to do. They do what they feel to do instead. And people don't feel the way that they want to. So let me leave you then with this point. Your job now is to learn to feel the way you want to feel, and then practice feeling that way. And I'm giving it as an example of the pity is to feel really good about being a winner. If you can come up with a better analogy so that you feel even better, let me know.
I will.
Okay? But your job is to let yourself feel really good. Have some suka. Have some pity. Have some, wow, this is really great stuff kind of feelings. But you have to practice that. It's a skill to be developed. And the primary skill to be developed is sati, and you have to keep remembering and remembering and remembering to practice this. Okay? Any more questions?
No more questions.
No more. Okay, well, when are you going to call again?
Tomorrow, I think.
Okay, that'll be all right.
Yeah. I'd
let
like
me
to
know how.
check in once a day.
Okay, that'll be all right. We may not be, if you're going to do it every day, we may not be so long as we did today. We're running it
Yeah, of course.
nearly
Yeah.
an hour and a half. But yeah, every day, that'll be good.
Okay.
So, how do I say Marcus? Is that what?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Marcus, we'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.